Broken trust begins not in the moment you hear the words that cut you, but in the silence that follows, in the heavy realization that everything you believed in was not what it seemed. For years I carried a simple belief, that my parents, the very people who brought me into this world, would guard my future as carefully as they guarded their own. The college fund was not just money, it was a symbol of their commitment, a promise that no matter how hard life became, education was my way forward and they would ensure it. I lived each day secure in that thought, feeling that even though we weren't the wealthiest family, we had something more powerful than wealth. We had loyalty, trust, and a bond that was supposed to remain unshakable. But trust is fragile, and when it is broken, it does not simply crack, it shatters into pieces that you can never put back together the same way. I remember the day I first overheard the conversation, not because I was searching for secrets, but because secrets have a way of revealing themselves when you least expect them. My mother's voice carried through the walls, excitement filling every word as she talked about the arrangements, the reservations, the thrill of finally giving my sister a chance to experience life. At first, I thought it was nothing more than another casual plan, perhaps something my sister had been saving for herself. But then the words struck me like lightning. We'll use the college fund, she deserves this break. My heart dropped, and in that instant, the walls of trust one had built over years crumbled. The fund that carried my dreams of stepping into a university, the countless days I imagined myself in lecture halls, working hard to carve a better future, had been turned into nothing more than a ticket for leisure. Broken trust is not only about the act itself, but about what it steals from you internally. It robs you of safety, of belief, of the comfort of thinking your loved ones stand on your side. I sat quietly, the words echoing in my head, replaying them over and over until they no longer felt like words but like a hammer beating against my chest. How could they? How could the people who told me to study harder, who reminded me daily that education was my escape, my key, suddenly take it away? My trust was not simply in their actions, it was in their role as parents, as protectors, as guardians of the very dream they had encouraged me to build. That day, it became clear that my role in the family was not equal, that my sacrifices and my efforts could be erased with a single selfish choice disguised as love for another child. I began to trace back memories, searching for signs I had ignored. The times they praised my sister for her beauty while I worked late into the night with my books, the times they excused her irresponsibility while I carried the weight of expectations on my shoulders, the moments I felt invisible but brushed it aside because parents love all their children, don't they? But the truth stood in front of me like a sharp mirror. Love, when it is not equal, becomes favoritism, and favoritism becomes betrayal. The money was just the surface wound, but the real cut was deeper. It was the realization that my trust in them had been misplaced for years. When trust is broken, the world around you shifts. I looked at my parents differently, no longer with the innocence of a child who believes they will always choose what is best for you, but with the wary eyes of someone who knows betrayal lives even inside a home. I heard their laughter as they planned, but for me those sounds became cracks in the foundation of everything I believed in. I felt like a stranger in my own house, a silent guest in a family that had shown me my place not through words but through axiom. Trust is not rebuilt easily, because once it is broken, you start to question everything. I wondered if every hug had been hollow, if every word of encouragement had been a lie, if every sacrifice I made to study harder had only been for their convenience. My mind became a battlefield, torn between wanting to confront them and being afraid of what more I might discover if I did. I replayed my father's lectures about responsibility, about saving, about the importance of hard work, and those same words mocked me now. He had told me countless times that my education mattered, yet when the moment came, his actions spoke of something else entirely, that my sister's temporary joy was worth more than my permanent future. I began to isolate myself, not because I wanted to, but because I could no longer find comfort in their presence. Trust, once broken, poisons every interaction. Their words felt empty, their gestures insincere, and even their apologies, when they finally came, could not wash away the bitterness of what they had done. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about the betrayal of a promise that was supposed to anchor my life. I thought about the countless hours I had spent planning my career, imagining the courses I would take, the dreams I would chase, and each thought twisted into a cruel reminder that my own parents had pulled the ground from under my feet. Even in silence, the broken trust screamed. At night I lay awake, questioning myself, asking if I was unworthy of the same love and care they had so freely given to my sister. During the day, I carried on, pretending nothing had happened, because admitting it out loud would mean accepting that the very foundation of my family was not what I believed. I realized that broken trust is not just about disappointment, it changes you, reshapes you, hardens you. It forces you to grow walls around yourself, walls that even those closest to you can never break again. The innocence of blind belief in them was gone. Dreams stolen is not just about the absence of opportunities, it is about the cruel moment when the future you built so carefully in your mind is ripped away without warning. From the earliest days of my childhood, my dreams were shaped by the stories I heard, the books I read, and the vision of a life where education would lead me to independence. I carried those dreams like a lantern through every dark moment, believing that no matter how difficult life felt, there was a light waiting for me at the end of the tunnel. That light was my college education, a chance to prove myself, to escape limitations, and to create a life where I would no longer depend on anyone's mercy. Every late night spent studying, every early morning I forced myself awake to prepare, every grade I fought for was fueled by that vision. My dreams were not luxuries, they were my survival, my lifeline, my hope for something greater than the walls I lived inside. When the truth came out that the fund meant to carry me forward had been redirected, it was as though someone reached inside and tore away the very core of my being. It wasn't just numbers in a bank account, it was years of effort, years of belief, years of trust that had been built brick by brick, now reduced to rubble. I sat in silence, trying to process it, but how do you process the theft of something you cannot touch, something that exists in the mind and the heart? My dreams had been alive, pulsing with energy, waiting to unfold, and in a single decision, they were suffocated. The pain was not in the money itself, but in what that money represented, a doorway to everything I wanted to be, slammed shut before I had the chance to walk through it. Every time I saw a university brochure or heard classmates discussing their plans, the reality of my stolen dreams cut deeper. I remembered the excitement I once felt when imagining myself among them, participating in classes, walking across campus with purpose, building friendships with people who shared the same hunger for growth. That vision haunted me because I had already lived it in my mind so many times, and now it was a life that belonged to someone else, not me. I envied their certainty, their security, their unshaken paths, while mine had been shattered by the people who were supposed to protect it. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't bad luck, it was a choice, and that choice left me with nothing but pieces of a dream too broken to piece back together the same way. Dreams stolen create a void that is hard to describe. It is not emptiness, it is a heavy weight pressing on the chest, a suffocating presence reminding you of everything you lost. I would open my books, stare at the pages, but the motivation that once burned so fiercely inside me had dimmed, because what use were grades now, what use was discipline, when the path I prepared for had been closed? I felt as though I had been tricked into believing, tricked into working tirelessly toward a future that was never truly mine to begin with. The cruelest part was knowing that the dreams had been taken not by strangers, not by fate, but by those closest to me, whose responsibility it had been to guard them. I thought back to the sacrifices I made, the parties I skipped, the friends I drifted from because my focus was on the bigger picture. I had told myself over and over that it would all be worth it, that every lonely night, every hour of exhaustion, would pay off once I entered college. And now, all I had to show for it were empty hands and a heart full of bitterness. Dreams, once stolen, cannot be easily replaced because they are not just goals, they are promises you make to yourself, promises built on FAI. In the days that followed, I found myself imagining what could have been. I saw versions of myself stepping onto campuses I would never enter, meeting professors I would never learn from, walking paths I would never tread. Those visions were like ghosts, haunting me with the life I had been denied. It was not enough that I had been deprived of money, I had been deprived of possibility, of growth, of becoming someone beyond the confines of disappointment. My stolen dreams left me stranded in a reality I had never planned for, a reality that felt too small for the person I knew I could have been. There is a cruel irony in having your dreams stolen by people who justified it as love for another. They told themselves it was for my sister's happiness, that she deserved joy, but what about me? Did I not deserve the joy of achieving the life I had worked for? Did my happiness not matter in the same way? Their decisions screamed the answer louder than any words. My dreams were dispensable, easily sacrificed for someone else's pleasure. And that realization carved itself into me, reminding me again and again that my worth in their eyes was not measured by my potential, but by how much they could take from me without regret. Dreams stolen do not vanish quietly, they leave scars that resurface in every conversation, in every reminder of what could have been. When I heard about scholarships or saw stories of students being celebrated for their admissions, I felt a sharp sting, not of jealousy but of injustice. I had the ability, I had the dedication, I had the right path, but all of it had been stolen by a decision that was never mine to make. I replayed the nights I stayed awake memorizing pages, the mornings I pushed myself to study while others slept, and all of it now felt wasted, thrown into a void because my future had been bartered away like it was nothing. Even in small moments, the theft revealed itself. When I walked past a school and saw children talking about what they wanted to become, I thought of the child I once was, filled with belief, filled with trust, filled with certainty that if I worked hard enough, I would achieve those dreams. That child was gone now, replaced by someone older, more bitter, more cautious, someone who knew too well that dreams are not always stolen by circumstances but sometimes by the very hands that once cradled you. And that knowledge was the heaviest part of all, because it left me not just without dreams, but without the innocence of ever believing fully in them again. Family betrayal carries a sting unlike any other, because it comes from the people whose love is supposed to be unconditional, whose loyalty is meant to be unwavering. When the world turns against you, you are told to believe that family will always remain, that within their arms lies protection from everything outside. That belief becomes the foundation of how you see yourself, how you measure safety, how you interpret belonging. But when betrayal blooms inside that sacred circle, it is not only your trust that breaks, it is your identity, your very understanding of what family means. The pain seeps deeper than disappointment, because betrayal from strangers wound. I had always thought my parents would stand beside me, that their sacrifices for me were genuine, that their promises to support my education were spoken with the weight of sincerity. I believed that even in our moments of disagreement or misunderstanding, the foundation of love would not crack. But when I discovered that my future had been sold for the temporary joy of another, I realized that love in this family came with conditions, with favoritism, with a cruel imbalance I had been blind to for years. Betrayal by them was not just an action, it was a revelation, a pulling away of the mask that revealed what had always been there. The words of encouragement they once gave me sounded hollow now, as though they had never meant them, as though they had always been speaking to fill the silence rather than to guide me. Betrayal within a family destroys not only trust but also belonging. I sat at the same dinner table, listening to the same voices, but everything felt foreign, as though I was a guest in a house I once called home. The air felt colder, the walls tighter, the silence louder, because I could no longer see them as guardians of my well-being. They had chosen her over me, chosen comfort over sacrifice, chosen pleasure over responsibility, and in doing so they had told me clearly where I stood in their eyes. Family is supposed to be a circle of equality, where each member matters, where each child holds the same weight in the hearts of their parents, but betrayal revealed that my place in that circle was fragile, conditional, expendable. It is strange how betrayal changes the way you look at everything. I found myself replaying old memories, searching for signs I had ignored, little moments that should have warned me of their favoritism. I remembered the times my achievements were brushed aside while her smallest accomplishments were celebrated, the way they excused her mistakes while holding me to impossible standards, the way their eyes sparkled more for her joys than for mine. These were the quiet betrayals that had built up over the years, unnoticed or unacknowledged, until they reached this breaking point where their choice of her happiness over my future was no longer subtle but undeniable. Each memory stung with new meaning, making me question whether love in this family had ever been balanced, or if betrayal had been hiding in plain sight all along. The cruelty of family betrayal lies in its intimacy. A stranger cannot touch the deepest parts of you because they do not know you. They cannot pierce the sacred bonds you believe are unbreakable. But a parent, a sibling, a blood relative, they hold the keys to your heart. They know your fears, your hopes, your weaknesses, and when they turn that knowledge into a weapon, the wound they create is unlike any other. My parents knew how hard I worked, how much my dreams meant to me, how education was not just an option but a lifeline. They knew the weight of my ambitions, and still, they chose to take that away. That was not ignorance, it was betrayal, deliberate and sharp, and it left me hollow in ways I could not explain. I found myself struggling with anger and confusion, torn between wanting to scream at them and wanting to retreat into silence. Confronting them meant admitting the depth of the betrayal, admitting that my safe haven had become unsafe, but avoiding it meant carrying a silent poison inside me that ate away at everything. Family betrayal is not just about one act, it becomes a lens through which you see every interaction. Their smiles looked false, their kindness felt staged, their affection seemed like manipulation rather than love. I could not look at them without wondering if every gesture, every word, had always carried hidden motives, if everything I believed about my place in their hearts had been nothing more than a carefully painted illusion. The betrayal also reshaped how I saw myself. Was I less worthy of love, less deserving of support, less important in their story? These questions haunted me, gnawing at my confidence, making me doubt not only them but myself. I wondered if perhaps I had been foolish to dream so much, foolish to believe I mattered equally, foolish to think that my sacrifices would be recognized. Family betrayal has a way of planting seeds of self-doubt that grow into shadows, casting darkness even on the few bright moments left. I began to question not just my parents' love but my own judgment, because how could I have been so blind for so long? Every interaction became a reminder of the betrayal. When my sister laughed about her trip, showing pictures and recounting her experiences, I felt invisible, erased, as though my pain did not exist in their reality. To them, the betrayal was already done and forgotten, but to me, it was alive and raw, pulsing through every moment. I wanted to scream that her joy was built on the ruins of my future, but my voice was trapped inside, silenced by the weight of disbelief. The betrayal turned me into a ghost in my own family, present but unseen, alive but unheard, and that invisibility cut deeper than ever. The silence that follows betrayal is suffocating. They went on with their lives, pretending nothing had changed, as though our family was still whole, as though their choice had not torn something irreparably. But inside me, everything had changed. The warmth of family dinners was gone, the laughter of shared moments felt hollow, the comfort of belonging had vanished. Betrayal had replaced all of it with bitterness, with caution, with the knowledge that even the people who call you their own can turn against you when it suits them. And once that knowledge enters your heart, it never leaves, it lingers like a shadow, reminding you at every turn that blood is not always thicker than water, that sometimes family can wound you in ways no stranger ever could. Sister's luxury, my loss is the kind of cruel contrast that makes betrayal burn even deeper, because the comfort of one becomes the destruction of another. Watching her bask in the glow of vacations, beaches, fine dining, and carefree laughter while I sat with the crushing weight of a stolen future was more than just unfair, it was a dagger twisted slowly in my chest. Luxury for her was not born of her own hard work, not earned through effort, not the fruit of sleepless nights or personal sacrifices. It was given to her at the expense of everything I had worked toward, carved out of the very foundation of my dreams. Each smile on her face became a reminder of what I had lost. Every picture she posted an echo of the money that should have been invested in my education. Every moment of her joy another mile between me and the life I had imagined for myself. The irony of the situation never left me. I had been disciplined, focused, determined, pouring every ounce of energy into shaping a future that would make my family proud, while she lived without restraint, indulging in the pleasures of the moment. Yet it was her indulgence that was rewarded, her leisure that was prioritized, her temporary happiness that was valued more than my long-term stability. I found myself staring at her photographs, her tanned skin glowing in the sunlight of distant places, her carefree laughter captured in frames that seemed almost staged to mock me. Every one of those images told a story, not of her vacation, but of my stolen future. The world saw her happiness, but only I saw the cost, the invisible price tag that was my college fund, my security, my hope. Sister's luxury, my loss was not simply about money, but about the weight of inequality that settled in our household. For her, life was a series of gifts, opportunities handed over without struggle, luxuries paid for without thought. For me, life had always been about striving, about proving myself, about walking the line between hope and responsibility. To watch my parents willingly choose her desires over my needs tore at the fragile balance of siblinghood. I could not look at her without seeing what had been taken from me, could not hear her stories of beaches and resorts without feeling the sting of betrayal. It created a distance, an invisible wall, where every word between us carried the weight of the truth. Her luxury existed only because my future had been sacrificed. Even her joy, as innocent as it may have seemed, became unbearable to me. She had no idea of the depth of what had been done, or perhaps she chose not to see it. Perhaps she convinced herself that it was fair, that she deserved it, that somehow my dreams mattered less than her comfort. I wondered if she even thought about me when she boarded planes, when she laughed under foreign skies, when she slept in hotel beds. In the quiet moments, I found myself comparing what I had lost with what she had gained. She had gained fleeting memories, temporary pleasures, pictures to decorate her life. I had lost years of preparation, a future carefully built on effort, an education that could have shaped the rest of my life. The imbalance of it all was suffocating. Luxury, in its essence, is excess, it is having more than you need. Loss, in its essence, is deprivation, it is being stripped of what you cannot live without. Our lives had become symbols of those extremes, hers bloated with excess, mine hollowed by deprivation. The hardest part was watching my parents beam with pride over her experiences, as though her vacation was some grand achievement, as though her leisure reflected well on them. They asked her about the sights she saw, the food she ate, the people she met, their voices filled with delight. I sat silently, listening, invisible at the same table, feeling like an outsider in my own family. My sacrifice was unspoken, my loss unacknowledged, my pain unseen. All that mattered in that moment was her luxury, her joy, her glow. And with every passing day, it became clearer that my loss was not an unfortunate accident to them, it was a choice they had made willingly, a sacrifice they demanded of me without hesitation. Sister's luxury, my loss carved itself into every part of my identity. It reminded me that fairness was not a value in my family, that effort and responsibility were not enough to secure love or support. It reminded me that I was expected to endure quietly while others enjoyed loudly, that my dreams were dispensable when weighed against someone else's desires. It made me question what kind of bond siblings were supposed to share, because in my mind siblings stood for each other, defended each other, understood each other. But in my reality, siblinghood was redefined as one taking and the other losing, one basking while the other mourned, one lifted while the other was pushed. The resentment grew not only toward her but toward myself, for believing for so long that my family valued me equally. I blamed myself for trusting too much, for working so hard with the belief that hard work would always be rewarded, for thinking my sacrifices would matter in the end. I wondered if I had been naive, if my role in the family had always been to give while she received, to endure while she indulged. Her luxury made me doubt everything about my worth, because if my dreams could be discarded so easily, then perhaps I was never as important as I believed. Each time she returned from her vacations, refreshed and radiant, I felt myself sink deeper into shadows. She carried stories of adventure while I carried the weight of betrayal. Her laughter became a sharp contrast to my silence, her joy a cruel mirror of my despair. The house itself began to feel like two separate worlds, one bright, filled with indulgence and approval, the other dim, filled with bitterness and neglect. And I was trapped in the latter, watching from the sidelines as her life expanded while mine shrank. Sister's luxury, my loss became more than just a moment, it became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. It became the phrase I repeated to myself when I tried to understand the imbalance, the injustice, the cruelty of the choices that had been made. It haunted me in the quiet hours of the night, whispered to me when I tried to focus on anything else, reminding me again and again that my future had been traded for temporary pleasure. And in that haunting, I realized that some losses never leave you, that they echo louder with every reminder of what was taken, and that the sight of someone else's luxury will always be, for me, a reflection of the loss that was forced upon me. Pain to strength is not a transition that happens overnight, nor is it a simple choice to rise above what breaks you. It is a process carved out of countless moments of silence, anger, grief, and reflection. At first, I resisted it. I did not want to carry the weight of betrayal. I did not want to admit that my dreams had been stolen, that my family had broken my trust, that my future had been thrown away. I wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to cling to the illusion that I was still safe, still valued, still loved in the same way. But pain does not allow you to live in denial for long. It whispers when you try to sleep, it burns when you wake, it follows you into every corner of your life until you are forced to face it. And when I finally faced it, when I allowed myself to sit with the reality of what had been done to me, I realized that pain could either bury me or teach me. It could either be the end of my story or the beginning of a new one. The strength did not come suddenly. It came in small ways, in decisions so subtle I did not even notice them at first. It came in the way I refused to let my sister's luxury define my worth, in the way I chose to continue studying even when the future I had planned seemed out of reach, in the way I decided to stop waiting for validation from people who had already proven they could betray me. Each choice was small, but together they became a map out of the darkness. Pain carved out resilience, forcing me to see that if I wanted to rise, I could no longer depend on anyone else to carry me. Strength was not something my parents could give me, nor something my sister could take away. It was something I had to build within myself, brick by brick, using the very pieces of what had been broken. Every time I thought about the betrayal, I felt a surge of anger, but over time I learned to use that anger as fuel. Instead of letting it consume me, I let it push me forward, let it remind me of why I could not give up. Their choices had stolen my fund, but I would not let them steal my determination. If they believed my dreams could be erased, then proving them wrong became my silent mission. I no longer wanted their approval, no longer cared for their excuses or apologies. What I wanted was to rise so high that their betrayal would look small compared to my resilience. Pain gave me that fire, and strength was born from the refusal to let it extinguish me. There were nights when I broke down, when the weight of everything pressed so heavily that I felt like collapsing under it. But even in those moments, strength was quietly forming. It was in the way I stood up again the next day, in the way I faced the world even with swollen eyes and a trembling heart. Strength does not mean the absence of pain, it means carrying it, living with it, and still moving forward. I began to see myself differently, not as a victim of betrayal but as someone who had survived it, someone who had endured what others might never fully understand. That shift in perspective was the foundation of my growth, because once I stopped asking why this happened to me and started asking how I could rise from it, the power returned to my hands. Pain to strength also meant learning to detach from what I could not control. I could not control the favoritism my parents showed, nor the luxury my sister enjoyed, nor the injustice of their choices. But I could control how I responded, how I carried myself, how I turned my suffering into motivation. I began to pour my energy into finding alternative paths, into seeking opportunities that did not depend on their support, into reshaping my future with whatever resources I could find. Pain sharpened my focus, made me hungrier, more determined, more resilient. Strength was not just about resilience, it was also about clarity. Pain had clouded my vision with grief, but once I embraced it, I began to see the truth with sharper eyes. I saw my family for who they truly were, not for who I wished they had been. I saw myself not as weak but as capable, not as abandoned but as independent. That clarity was painful in itself, because it meant letting go of the dream of a perfect family, of unconditional support, of equal love. But it was also liberating, because once I stopped waiting for them to save me, I realized I could save myself. Every betrayal, every stolen dream, every moment of invisibility became fuel for a stronger version of me. I found strength in silence, in endurance, in persistence, in the quiet determination to rebuild what had been torn apart. Pain had stripped me to my core, but in that raw state, I discovered resilience I never knew I had. I discovered that strength is not born in comfort, but in suffering, not in privilege, but in struggle. And though the scars of betrayal remained, those scars became proof of my survival, proof that even the deepest pain could not erase me. Slowly, I began to transform, no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I was building from the ashes. Pain had broken me, but it had also rebuilt me, piece by piece, into someone harder, stronger, sharper, and more determined than before. The very thing that had been meant to destroy me had become the foundation of my resilience, the fire in my spirit, the strength in my voice. And with each passing day, I carried that transformation quietly but fiercely, knowing that the path from pain to strength was not just my survival, but my power. Revenge unfolds not in a single moment of fury, but in the slow, deliberate process of turning pain into a weapon, betrayal into motivation, and silence into action. It begins quietly, in the back of the mind, where anger simmers and grief transforms into resolve. At first, revenge feels like a fantasy, an impossible dream you replay when the hurt is too much to bear. You imagine them feeling what you felt, losing what you lost, facing the weight of consequences they thought they would never have to endure. These imaginings bring a fleeting sense of control, a reminder that the story is not finished, that you still have power left in your hands. Over time, those thoughts grow sharper, clearer, no longer vague desires but concrete plans. Revenge is not always about destruction, it is about balance, about reclaiming what was taken, about ensuring that the ones who caused your pain are forced to face the mirror they have avoided for so long. When I first felt the betrayal of my parents taking my college fund to give my sister a vacation, I was paralyzed. The hurt was too raw, the injustice too sharp. I wanted to scream, to confront, to demand answers that I already knew would be shallow excuses. But as days passed, that initial wound began to shape itself into something colder, something more focused. I stopped wasting energy on begging for fairness, and instead began to think about what I could do to ensure they never forgot what they had done. Revenge unfolded inside me not as blind rage, but as a quiet fire, steady and determined, waiting for the right moment to burn. Every conversation I had with them after that carried a double edge. On the surface, I remained calm, measured, almost detached. But underneath, I was gathering, observing, calculating. They thought I had accepted what happened, thought I was moving on, but they didn't see the way my silence was sharpening. They didn't realize that every time they dismissed me, every time they laughed at her stories of. Even with my sister, revenge found its form. I did not need to confront her directly, did not need to shout or accuse. Her luxury was temporary, her pleasures fleeting, and deep down I knew that one day she would look back and realize the cost of her comfort. Revenge was not about taking those pleasures from her, but about making sure she could never escape the truth that her vacations were built on the ruins of my dreams. That knowledge would linger in her mind, unspoken but undeniable, a shadow that followed her no matter how far she traveled. Revenge unfolded in silence, in patience, in the steady growth of strength. I no longer sought their apologies, no longer waited for their recognition. Instead, I created my own recognition, sought opportunities outside their reach, and built connections they could not control. I transformed my story into something larger than their betrayal, and in doing so, I ensured that they would never be able to escape the consequences of their actions. Because every time they looked at me, they would see the reflection of their choice, not in a broken child but in a stronger, sharper, unshakable survivor who refused to be erased. The sweetest part of revenge is not in seeing them suffer, but in knowing they cannot undo what they did, and yet I still rose beyond it. It is in knowing that their betrayal did not end me, but instead became the very fuel that carried me forward. Revenge is not always loud, not always violent, it can be quiet, steady, and unrelenting, unfolding over time until it becomes undeniable. And as it unfolded in my life, it transformed me, reminding me that betrayal may have stolen my trust, my dreams, my peace, but it could never steal my will to rise, to fight, to reclaim power in ways they never expected.